The classroom buzzed with excitement as students from various alien species filled the seats. It was an unusual sight, one that many humans would have found both intimidating and fascinating. This academy, unlike any other in the galaxy, was designed for interspecies learning. Alien students from all over the universe gathered here to learn about the biology of Earth and its people. Some were insect-like beings, others looked like floating energy, while some resembled humanoid creatures, but all of them were eager to study the human species, one of the youngest yet most intriguing races in the galaxy. Today, the class had gathered for a special lesson. It was a practical session on human anatomy, and the teacher, a respected alien professor from a distant star system, had a big announcement. The students, many of whom had studied Earth from the comfort of their home worlds, were about to experience something far more interactive than a typical lecture. Today, the professor began, his voice deep and commanding. You will have the opportunity to study human anatomy up close. But there's a twist. We've asked a volunteer to come forward to demonstrate the human body. You will see firsthand the complexity of human biology. A murmur swept through the class. The alien students whispered to one another in different languages. Their curiosity piqued. Some were excited, others nervous. There had been rumors that humans were fragile and weak compared to other species, but no one had ever seen one up close. The idea of actually touching and examining the human body was both thrilling and unsettling for most. The teacher paused, scanning the room with his sharp, glowing eyes. We'll start with a demonstration of the most fascinating aspects of human anatomy. Who will volunteer? There was an uneasy silence. Some of the alien students exchanged nervous glances, unsure if it was wise to offer themselves as volunteers for such a project. The human species, though resilient, had often been seen as weak and overly emotional in the eyes of other species. But this was their chance to learn the truth. Finally, one human student raised his hand. The entire class turned to look at him. A young man, standing confidently at the back of the room, stepped forward. He had been quietly sitting through the lessons, his face calm and composed. His name didn't matter. This moment was bigger than any individual. Today, he was a representative of humanity. The volunteer was a tall human, his body lean and strong, with an air of quiet confidence. He was of average build by human standards, but that didn't matter to the alien students. They had heard about human physicality, how humans were able to endure injuries, adapt to harsh environments, and push through exhaustion like no other species. And yet they still saw humans as fragile creatures, capable of being easily hurt. This demonstration, they believed, would prove their point. The volunteer stepped to the center of the room, where a large, transparent display screen had been set up. He gave a small, reassuring smile to the alien students, though inside, he was nervous. He had heard the rumors about how some species thought humans were weak, and he knew that this lesson would challenge those perceptions. But he was determined to do his part, to show them that humanity was more than just frailty. The alien students stared at him, their eyes wide, some of them leaning forward in anticipation. The volunteer turned to the teacher. "I'm ready," he said. The teacher nodded, gesturing for him to begin. "Please, start with the human skeleton. Show them how it supports the body and helps humans move." The volunteer nodded again and began to slowly take off his outer garment, revealing his torso. The room fell silent. The alien students had heard about human bodies, but now they were about to see it firsthand. The volunteer stood tall, his muscles subtly shifting as he moved. As he explained the basic structure of the human skeleton, how bones like the femur and humerus held the body upright, there was a sense of awe in the room. His spine was strong, his chest well-defined. Some of the aliens, especially the ones from species with exoskeletons, looked at him with a mix of fascination and confusion. The idea of a creature so physically vulnerable, with only soft tissue and bones to protect itself, was strange to them. One of the students, a tall alien with dark green skin and large, bulging eyes, raised his hand. "You mean?" The bones are all that hold the human body together. There are no exoskeletons, no outer armor. The volunteer smiled softly. Yes, the skeleton is all we have, but it's strong enough to support the entire body. The alien seemed surprised by this. In his species, their exoskeletons were thick and hard, protecting them from almost any kind of injury. To think that a soft body could survive without such protection seemed impossible. Now, the volunteer continued, let's talk about the heart and circulatory system. He gestured to a screen that displayed a cross-section of the human heart. As he described the complex way blood flowed through the heart and vessels, the alien students listened intently, trying to understand how a creature with such a delicate structure could survive for so long. Many of them had never seen anything like it before. This is where the magic happens, the volunteer said. Our hearts pump blood through our veins, delivering oxygen and nutrients to every part of our body. Without it, we couldn't survive. The room remained silent. The alien students were stunned. Despite their technological advancements, they had never fully understood the marvel of human biology. Each new fact about the human body made them question everything they thought they knew. As the volunteer continued his demonstration, the students couldn't help but wonder, how had such a fragile species managed to survive on a planet full of dangers? And how had they managed to make their mark on the universe? The class had gone silent as the human volunteer continued his anatomy demonstration. Each alien student, from the towering insect-like creatures to the small, glowing beings, watched with wide eyes. They had never seen anything quite like this before. Though many had heard about humans and their strange biology, there was something profoundly different about seeing it up close. The human body was fragile, but there was a certain mystery to it that sparked their curiosity. As the volunteer explained the complexity of the human circulatory system, the students couldn't help but stare in awe. The screen in front of them showed detailed images of the heart pumping blood through a network of veins and arteries. The professor, an alien from a highly evolved species, stood at the back of the room, his arms folded across his chest. He had seen countless creatures from all over the galaxy, but humans were still a mystery. Why are they so fragile? Asked one of the students, a young alien with translucent skin that shimmered under the classroom lights. Her species, capable of regenerating limbs in hours, could hardly understand the concept of weakness in the human body. It doesn't make sense. How do they survive with such delicate organs? The human volunteer, who had heard the question, smiled calmly. It's not just the body. It's what we do with it. Human strength comes from our ability to adapt, to push through pain, to heal, and to fight when needed. The alien students, many of them skeptical, exchanged glances. They had always assumed that the universe's most resilient species were those with the toughest, most durable bodies. They had seen creatures from their home planets who could withstand extreme temperatures, pressurized atmospheres, and nearly any injury. Yet here they were, witnessing a species that, on the surface, seemed so fragile. And yet, this species had been able to spread across an entire planet and even venture into space. The professor, sensing the growing confusion, decided to clarify. Humans are not strong because of their bodies. They are strong because of their minds and their adaptability. What makes them unique is their ability to face adversity head-on and to survive when others would perish. One of the alien students, a towering being with 6 arms and a thick, armored exoskeleton, spoke up. So, you're saying that it's the human spirit, not the body, that makes them powerful? The human volunteer nodded. Exactly. Humans rely on their ability to think, to innovate, and to work together. When faced with danger, we find a way to overcome it, no matter how challenging. As the volunteer spoke, the other students couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. They had always prided themselves on their physical superiority. After all, their species could regenerate entire limbs in mere hours, survive on planets with extreme atmospheres, and even withstand the vacuum of space for short periods. But here, they were being shown that humans didn't rely on the same strengths they did. Instead, humans relied on something more intangible, something that made them unpredictable, and in many ways, more dangerous. One of the alien students, a young creature with blue skin and large, luminescent eyes, raised her hand. But how does that explain their survival on such a harsh planet? Earth has so many dangers, predators, viruses, extreme weather. How do they survive that? The volunteer paused for a moment before responding. Humans have developed ways to adapt to nearly every environment. Our immune systems can fight off countless diseases. We have built technology to protect ourselves from harsh climates. And of course, we have built societies that work together to ensure our survival. The alien students leaned in, captivated. They had heard stories of human ingenuity, how the humans had built entire cities, developed space travel, and even overcome some of the harshest environments on their own planet. But hearing it from a human, standing right in front of them, made it feel real in a way that textbooks and simulations could never capture. Another student, this one with a smooth metallic body, spoke up. But if they're so adaptable, why do they need so much support from technology? Why can't they survive without their tools? The volunteer smiled, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. Humans are not perfect. We are fragile, and we need tools and technology to help us survive in extreme conditions. But that doesn't mean we aren't strong. It just means that we understand our limitations, and we work to overcome them. Without technology, we wouldn't be able to survive in places like space, but our minds give us the ability to create those technologies. The students were beginning to understand. The more they learned about humans, the more they realized how different their approach to survival was. While many species relied on physical strength or resilience, humans relied on their minds, on creativity, problem-solving, and cooperation. For a moment, the classroom fell quiet. The aliens looked at each other, processing everything they had just learned. The more they heard about humanity's strength, the more they began to question their initial assumptions. Could it be that humans weren't weak? Could it be that humans, despite their fragile bodies, were the most dangerous species in the galaxy because of their ability to adapt and overcome? The professor, sensing the change in the room, decided to continue the lesson. Now that we understand the basics of human anatomy, let's move on to the nervous system. One of the most fascinating aspects of human biology is how their brain works. Unlike many species, humans have an incredibly high level of cognitive ability. They can learn, adapt, and even communicate across vast distances. As the class progressed, the alien students found themselves more and more intrigued by the human species. They were beginning to see humans not as fragile creatures, but as a species that had evolved in ways no one had fully understood before. They were no longer just the small, weak race from Earth. They were potential allies, and perhaps even future leaders in the galaxy. And as the class continued, the volunteer couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Today, he had shown these beings something they had never seen before. He had proven that humanity's true strength wasn't in its physical form. It was in its ability to adapt, survive, and thrive against all odds. As the lesson continued, the volunteer began to sense a shift in the room. The once skeptical and curious alien students were now genuinely captivated by the human body and mind. The professor's voice echoed in the background, explaining more about the human nervous system, while the volunteers stood at the center of the room, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The students had begun to see humans not as weak, fragile creatures, but as survivors, adaptable, resilient, and capable of remarkable feats. Now let's move on to the human brain, the professor said, drawing attention back to the display screen. This is where the true power of the human species lies. The alien students shifted in their seats, eager to hear more. They had already been impressed by what they'd seen. The human body, despite its lack of physical defenses, had its own strengths. But the mind, the brain, was something even more extraordinary. Humans, though physically vulnerable, had developed the ability to think in ways that no other species had ever quite understood. The volunteer stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. "The human brain is one of the most advanced in the galaxy," he explained. "It's capable of learning, adapting, and creating in ways that many species can't. It's what allows humans to invent technology, communicate across vast distances, and solve problems that seem impossible." The alien students listened in rapt attention. Some of them were skeptical, others fascinated. To many of them, intelligence was tied directly to physical strength or resilience. They had never considered that a species could be powerful simply because of how they used their minds. "What makes the human brain so powerful?" asked one of the students, a small, soft-spoken being with glowing skin. "You say it can solve problems, but how?" The volunteer smiled, stepping closer to the screen. "Humans have something called creativity, an ability to think beyond what is in front of them, to imagine things that don't exist yet. This imagination, paired with reason, allows humans to solve complex problems, even in situations where they have no prior experience. It's what has allowed them to survive on a planet filled with so many dangers." The alien students exchanged looks. The idea that a species could use imagination to overcome threats seemed strange, almost impossible to them. Their species, many of them, relied on physical traits like strength, speed, or regenerative abilities to survive. They couldn't imagine relying solely on their minds to navigate the challenges of life. The volunteer continued, sensing the growing interest in the room. "But it's not just about intelligence. It's also about how humans use their emotions to drive action. While many species act purely on instinct or logic, humans are deeply motivated by emotions. Fear, hope, love. These emotions push them to take risks, to innovate, and to face danger when others would flee." The students were silent. They had heard of emotions, of course, but they had never considered them a driving force in a species' survival. Many species experienced fear, but few were willing to face it head-on the way humans did. One of the larger, more armored students, a being with a tough, chitinous exoskeleton, raised a question. "So, humans rely on emotions like fear and hope to survive. But doesn't that make them weak? Emotions can be unpredictable." The volunteer nodded. "Yes, emotions can be unpredictable. But that's also what makes them powerful. Fear can make humans cautious, but it can also push them to be brave when necessary. Hope can drive them to keep going, even when all seems lost. And love drives them to protect and care for others, even at great personal risk. These emotions give them the strength to endure and to fight for what matters most." The alien students looked at each other, clearly processing this new perspective. Some of them had trouble understanding how emotions could be a source of strength, but others were beginning to see the wisdom in it. The volunteer had made them question everything they thought they knew about humans. They had always believed that physical strength was the key to survival, but now they saw that humans had something far deeper, something they hadn't yet fully understood. As the class continued, the volunteer moved on to the human immune system. "This," he said, "is another reason humans have survived despite their physical fragility. The human immune system is incredibly complex and efficient. It protects humans from diseases, bacteria, and viruses that would otherwise be fatal." The alien students leaned forward, their interest piqued. Many of them had species that could regenerate from wounds or withstand harsh environments, but few understood how the immune system worked to protect a creature from unseen threats. "The human body is constantly fighting off infections," the volunteer continued. "Even when we don't notice it, our immune system is working tirelessly to keep us healthy. It's why humans can survive in environments that would otherwise be deadly, because the body has its own defense mechanisms that are always working behind the scenes." A murmur of surprise rippled through the class. Some of the aliens had never considered the invisible battle that raged inside every human body. It was a level of complexity they had not anticipated. "What about human healing?" asked the glowing-skinned student. "They don't have the ability to regenerate like us. How do they heal after an injury?" The volunteer smiled. It's true that humans can't regenerate limbs or recover from injuries as quickly as some species, but their healing process is incredibly efficient. Their bodies work together to repair damage, from the bones to the skin to the internal organs. And over time, humans have developed medical technologies that help them heal faster and better. It's not just the body's natural healing ability, it's the combination of biology and technology. As the lesson drew to a close, the alien students sat in stunned silence. They had expected a simple, anatomical breakdown of the human body, but what they had learned went far beyond that. They had discovered the inner workings of a species that was both physically fragile and incredibly strong, a species whose power came from its mind, emotions, and adaptability. The professor, sensing that the lesson had made an impact, nodded in approval. Today, you have seen the true strength of humans. It's not in their muscles or their skin. It's in their minds, their hearts, and their unyielding will to survive. The alien students left the classroom that day with a new understanding. Humans were no longer just a weak species from a distant planet. They were a species capable of incredible resilience and strength, a species that could thrive in the face of overwhelming odds. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could learn something from them. As the next few days passed, the volunteers' demonstration had left a lasting impact on the alien students. Their perception of humans had changed dramatically. No longer did they see humans as weak creatures from a fragile planet. Now they understood that there was much more to the species than met the eye. Their adaptability, creativity, and emotional strength had shown the aliens that humans were a force to be reckoned with. The class had been assigned a new project, to explore the concept of human relationships. The professor, eager to see how much the students had absorbed, tasked them with examining the role of social bonds in human survival. While many alien species thrived alone or in small, independent groups, humans had a unique way of forming complex relationships that played a critical role in their survival. The volunteer, once again standing at the front of the class, began to speak. Humans are incredibly social creatures, he explained. Unlike many species, humans rely heavily on relationships to thrive. It's through cooperation, family bonds, and friendships that humans have built civilizations and advanced their technology. They are not solitary hunters or wanderers. They survive because they work together. The alien students looked at each other in surprise. This concept was so different from the way most of them had been taught. Many of them came from species that valued individual strength above all else. The idea that a species could depend on relationships was foreign to them. One of the students, a tall creature with translucent wings, raised a hand. "You're saying humans rely on others for survival. How do they do that?" "We're taught that the strongest survive alone." The volunteer nodded thoughtfully. It's true that humans are physically weak compared to many species, but they have something that makes them unique: the ability to form deep emotional bonds with others. Humans form families, create friendships, and build communities. These relationships are their strength. The alien students listened intently, trying to grasp this idea. They had heard of emotions, of course, but they had never considered that emotions could be the foundation of survival. They had always believed that strength came from the individual, from the body, and from the ability to fight off enemies or endure hardships alone. The power of human relationships goes beyond just survival. The volunteer continued. Humans also depend on each other for emotional support. When one human is in pain, others are there to help. When one is lost or confused, others offer guidance. These connections are what allow humans to thrive even in the most challenging circumstances. A small alien student, whose species was known for its incredible intelligence but lack of emotional attachment, spoke up. "So humans are weak because they need others? That seems like a disadvantage. If one person falls, they all fall." The volunteer shook his head. "It's true that humans are vulnerable, but their relationships are what make them strong. When one human falls, others step in to help. It's not about the individual. It's about the community. In times of crisis, Humans have shown a remarkable ability to come together and support each other, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The students were silent for a moment, reflecting on what they had just heard. For many of them, it was difficult to imagine a species thriving by relying on others. Their own species valued independence above all else. To be vulnerable, to rely on others for support, this was something many of them could not understand. One of the larger students, a being with a hard, reflective exoskeleton, spoke with a deep voice. "Are you saying that humans can't survive on their own? That they need others to stay alive?" The volunteer smiled. "Not exactly. Humans can survive alone, but they don't want to. They know that strength comes from unity, from working together. In fact, it's the way humans handle their emotions and relationships that makes them unique. They aren't afraid to express their feelings, to rely on others, and to ask for help when they need it." The alien students exchanged looks, some still confused, while others were starting to understand. They had been taught to be self-reliant, to trust in their own abilities and strength. The idea of relying on others, of forming emotional bonds, was a concept they had never fully explored. The professor, seeing the students' growing interest, decided to push the discussion further. "Let's look at how human relationships form and evolve. Families are the first social structures humans experience. They rely on each other for emotional support, protection, and care. As humans grow older, they form friendships and alliances. These connections are essential for human survival, but they also make life worth living." A quiet murmur spread through the class as the students reflected on the concept of family. To many of them, the idea of a family was based on biological bonds, but human families were much more than that. Humans created bonds that went beyond bloodlines, bonds of friendship, of loyalty, and of shared experiences. The volunteer added, "In fact, humans have a saying, 'It takes a village.' This means that it's not just the family that helps raise a child or support a person. It's the community around them. Humans believe that it's the collective effort of everyone working together that helps an individual grow and succeed." The alien students seemed to absorb this idea with varying levels of understanding. Some of them were beginning to grasp how deeply interconnected human beings were. They saw the importance of cooperation, of working together, and of supporting each other. Others still couldn't shake their skepticism. How could something as intangible as a relationship be so essential for survival? One of the students, a young alien with soft, glowing features, asked a question that had been on everyone's mind. "But if humans rely so much on others, what happens when they lose those connections? What happens if their relationships break down?" The volunteer's expression grew somber. "That's when humans struggle the most. When relationships break down, when a human feels isolated or alone, it can have devastating effects. Mental health becomes an issue, and many humans find it difficult to cope with the absence of meaningful connections. That's why human societies work hard to ensure that no one is left behind." The alien students were silent once more, reflecting on the weight of the volunteer's words. It was clear now that human relationships were not just a survival mechanism, but a key part of what made humanity so unique. It wasn't just physical strength, intelligence, or technology that had allowed them to survive. It was their capacity for empathy, connection, and community. As the class ended, the students filed out, each one deep in thought. They had come to realize that humans, despite their physical vulnerabilities, were resilient in ways they had never fully understood before. Their strength wasn't in their bodies. It was in their relationships, their emotions, and their ability to work together. And perhaps in time, they too could learn to value those same qualities. The alien students had been reflecting deeply on the volunteers' teachings. What had seemed like simple facts about human anatomy, survival, and relationships had transformed into a new understanding of a species that was far more complex than they had ever imagined. As the weeks went by, the volunteer continued to be at the heart of these lessons, and the aliens grew more and more fascinated by humanity's resilience. One day, the professor announced that it was time to explore another remarkable aspect of human strength, The power of human will. The concept of willpower was something the alien students found difficult to grasp. In their cultures, the strongest were those who relied on physical power or innate abilities. The idea that a human could survive, thrive, or succeed simply because they refused to give up was something that seemed almost impossible to them. The volunteer stepped forward to explain. Willpower is one of the most powerful forces in the human experience, he began. It's the ability to keep going, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's the drive to achieve something, no matter how impossible it seems. The alien students looked at him with curiosity, unsure of how to comprehend such an abstract idea. The class had already learned about the human body's complex systems, the human mind's incredible adaptability, and the importance of emotional connections. But willpower, as a driving force, seemed almost mystical to them. How could the refusal to give up lead to success? How could something as intangible as willpower make a difference in a battle for survival? One of the students, a tall being with skin that shimmered like metal, raised a hand. You speak of willpower as if it is a force of nature, but is it not simply the result of physical strength or mental abilities? Why would a human persist when they have no chance of victory? The volunteer smiled and nodded. That's a good question. And the answer is simple. Willpower is not about having the strength to win from the start. It's about determination. Humans, unlike many species, have the ability to endure. They can push themselves beyond their limits, even when it seems like there's no hope. The alien students seemed confused. They had always believed that the most powerful were those with the most physical strength, or those with natural gifts. But this idea of pushing through adversity, of continuing to fight even in the face of overwhelming odds, was new to them. The volunteer continued. Human history is full of examples where the underdog, someone with no advantages, fought against impossible odds and succeeded, not because they were stronger or faster, but because they refused to give up. Their will to survive, to succeed, is what drove them. The professor nodded in agreement. One of the most famous examples of human willpower is the story of a species called the humans, space explorers. These humans traveled beyond their planet, to worlds far away. They were not the strongest, nor the most advanced species, but they had a dream, to reach the stars. And with nothing but determination and willpower, they achieved that dream. Against every obstacle, they continued. Their journey wasn't easy, but they refused to turn back. The students, many of whom had only heard stories of the great spacefaring species, were stunned. They had always believed that space exploration was reserved for the most advanced civilizations, those with superior technology or immense power. To hear that humans, a species that seemed so fragile and limited, had traveled beyond their homeworld through sheer will was something they couldn't quite understand. How? One of the students asked, their voice soft with disbelief. How did they do it? They weren't stronger or more advanced. How could they possibly have succeeded? The volunteer looked out over the class, seeing the mix of confusion and awe. That's the beauty of human willpower. Humans may not have the strongest bodies or the most advanced technology, but they have something else, an unyielding spirit. They're willing to sacrifice everything, to give their all, for something they believe in. It's not about physical strength. It's about the strength of their heart and mind. That's why they succeed when others might fail. The students, still puzzled, began to think of their own species. Many of them were trained from a young age to believe that power was the key to everything. They didn't understand how willpower could be so important. But as they listened to the volunteer speak, they began to see something they hadn't considered before. The human spirit was not just a physical thing. It was an emotional and mental force that could not be easily broken. Another student, a small creature with transparent skin that shifted colors in the light, raised an interesting point. If willpower is so important, does that mean humans are not afraid? Do they not fear failure? The volunteer shook his head. Humans feel fear just like anyone else, but what makes them different is that they don't let fear control them. They face their fears, push through them, and keep going. That's the essence of willpower. One of the larger, more muscular students who had been silent until now spoke. But if a human faces something stronger than them, how can they possibly win? The volunteer smiled. That's the thing about willpower. It doesn't always guarantee victory, but it guarantees they will fight until the end. Sometimes, the human spirit is more powerful than physical strength, and sometimes that's all they need to overcome the odds. The class was silent for a moment, the weight of the volunteers' words sinking in. The concept of willpower was something they couldn't fully comprehend, but they were beginning to understand its importance. They were beginning to see that humans, despite their physical limitations, had a strength that no one could measure. It wasn't in their muscles or their bones, but in their hearts and minds. As the class ended, the students slowly filed out, still deep in thought. The volunteer had opened their eyes to a new truth, that it was not just physical strength or intelligence that made a species powerful, but the will to fight, to survive, and to never give up. And for the first time, the alien students realized that this might be the key to humanity's incredible success. The days passed quickly as the alien students continued to learn about human strength. The idea of willpower had planted a seed of curiosity in them. They were beginning to understand that humans weren't simply defined by their physical strength or intelligence, but by something deeper, their hearts. One day, the professor decided to push their understanding even further. He tasked the class with a new challenge, to understand the concept of compassion. It was time for the alien students to see how humans responded to the suffering of others. The professor knew that this would be one of the most difficult concepts for them to grasp. After all, many of the alien species valued strength, self-reliance, and survival above all else. The idea that humans could show empathy and care for others, even for those they did not know, seemed foreign to them. The volunteer, now an important figure in the class, stood before the group. Compassion is one of the defining features of humanity, he explained. It's the ability to feel for others and to act on that feeling. It's not just about helping your own family or your closest friends. It's about helping anyone in need. This is what makes humans different. The alien students listened closely, but it was clear that they had a hard time understanding. The concept of compassion was something they could only feel in their own small circles, family, friends, and those who were part of their own species. They had no experience with the idea of extending kindness to those outside their immediate circle, let alone to those who were suffering or in need. One student, a tall being with an almost liquid-like body, raised a hand. You're saying humans feel compassion for others, even when it doesn't benefit them directly. That seems strange. Why would they do such a thing? The volunteer nodded thoughtfully. That's the essence of compassion. Humans help others not because they expect anything in return, but because they understand that everyone deserves kindness and care. It's part of what makes them human. When someone suffers, a human will feel it too, even if they don't know the person. Another student, a being with sharp, angular features, spoke up. But how can that be? How does that work? To care for someone you don't know, it seems inefficient. If it doesn't help the individual, then why do it? The volunteer smiled gently, sensing the confusion. It's not about efficiency. It's about connection. Humans understand that everyone is connected, and when one person suffers, the entire community feels the impact. They know that helping others is a way of strengthening the bonds between them. Compassion creates unity, and it fosters cooperation. It's what allows humans to build communities and societies. The professor stepped in to explain further. Humans experience something called empathy. It's the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to feel their pain, and to act in a way that helps ease their suffering. It's not always about solving the problem or fixing the situation, but about offering support, kindness, and understanding. The alien students began to look at each other, unsure of how to process this information. To them, it was difficult to imagine a species that would help others without expecting anything in return. They had been taught that survival was about looking out for yourself, your own people, and ensuring that your species remained strong. Helping others without a personal gain seemed like a waste of resources. The volunteer, noticing the puzzled expressions, decided to share a story. Let me tell you about an event that happened on Earth. It's called humanitarian aid. When a natural disaster strikes, like an earthquake or a flood, humans often come together to help. People from all over the world travel to the disaster zones to provide food, shelter, and medical care. They don't do it for fame or rewards. They do it because they feel for those who are suffering. The class was silent, trying to picture such an event. The volunteer continued. In one such disaster, a group of humans traveled from a distant land to help. They risked their lives to save others, even though they had no personal connection to the people they were helping. They did it because they understood the pain of loss, of suffering. They knew that if they didn't help, others would suffer more. One of the alien students, a small creature with soft, glowing eyes, spoke softly. But isn't that dangerous? Why would humans risk their lives for others? Isn't it better to protect yourself first? The volunteer paused for a moment before responding. That's what makes humans different. They are willing to put themselves in harm's way for others because they believe in the power of compassion. They understand that helping one person, even at a personal cost, can make a huge difference in the world. It's not just about survival. It's about creating a better world for everyone. The professor added, and it's not just during times of crisis. Humans show compassion every day. In the workplace, in their families, in their friendships. They show kindness, they offer support, and they take care of one another. Compassion is woven into the very fabric of human society. As the class ended, the alien students left the room in thoughtful silence. They had learned something profound that day. They had always believed that strength came from within, from the individual. But now, they understood that there was another form of strength, the strength that came from caring for others. They saw how compassion had built human societies, how it had created bonds between people that went beyond bloodlines, beyond species, beyond any physical barrier. For the first time, the alien students saw humanity in a new light. They understood that humans weren't just a species of survivalists. They were a species of caretakers, of protectors, of those who saw the suffering of others and chose to make a difference. It was a lesson they would carry with them, one that might forever change how they viewed not just humans, but the value of compassion in their own lives. The last day of class had arrived, and the alien students were feeling a mix of emotions. They had learned so much about humans over the past weeks. Their minds had opened to new ideas about strength, resilience, willpower, and compassion. But today, the professor promised something even more profound. This lesson would bring everything together. The volunteer stood before the class once again. The room was quieter than usual, as everyone knew this would be the final lesson. There was a certain tension in the air, a feeling that something important was about to unfold. "We've covered a lot," the volunteer began. "We've talked about how humans survive, how they push through challenges, how they show compassion to others. But now we need to explore something even more incredible. It's the core of what makes humans who they are. And it's the reason they've been able to build civilizations, explore the stars, and keep going through even the hardest times." The alien students leaned forward, eager to hear more. The volunteer continued, "Humans are driven by a deep sense of purpose. It's not just about survival. It's about finding meaning, a reason to keep going, even when everything seems lost. This is something that sets them apart from many species. When humans face hardships, they don't just ask how to survive. They ask why they should survive." The professor nodded in agreement. For humans, survival is not just about existing. It's about living for something greater than themselves. Whether it's their family, their community, or a cause they believe in, humans will fight to protect what they value most. One of the students, a sleek being with crystal-like skin, raised a question. But how can they know what their purpose is? How do they find meaning? The volunteer smiled. That's one of the mysteries of being human. Some people find their purpose early in life. Others search for it their entire lives. But one thing that's certain is that humans never stop searching. It's part of their nature. The professor added, human history is full of examples of people who have faced great struggles but kept going because they believed in a cause greater than themselves. Some fought for justice, others for freedom, and some for the protection of the innocent. But no matter the reason, humans are driven by the need to make the world a better place, even if it means sacrificing their own safety or comfort. Another student, a creature with multiple eyes and shifting shapes, asked, "So you're saying that humans will fight for others, even when there's nothing to gain for themselves?" The volunteer nodded. Exactly. That's one of the most powerful things about humanity. They understand that life is not just about taking and gaining, but about giving. The greatest heroes in human history are those who risk everything for a cause, for the people they love, or for the ideals they believe in. The class was silent as the alien students absorbed the depth of what they were hearing. This idea of living for something greater than oneself was difficult for them to comprehend. In their cultures, the survival of the species came first. Individual achievement, power, and strength were the ultimate goals. But humans fought for something else. They fought for their dreams, for their values, for a world they wanted to see. The volunteer paused for a moment before sharing a final example. One of the most profound stories of human courage comes from their fight against tyranny. There was a time in their history when a great war threatened to destroy everything they held dear. Many of their bravest soldiers fought not just for their own safety, but to protect the freedom of others. They fought for something greater than their own survival, the idea that everyone deserved the right to live in peace. The professor added, this struggle became a turning point in human history. It wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about standing up for the principles of justice, equality, and freedom. That is what defines humanity's strength. It's their ability to stand for what is right, no matter the cost. The alien students were now deep in thought. They could no longer see humanity as just a species that had survived against the odds. They now understood that humans were driven by something more profound, by a sense of purpose that went beyond simple survival. It was this purpose that allowed them to achieve greatness, to push the boundaries of what seemed possible. One of the students, a being with luminous tentacles, spoke quietly. You've shown us that humans are not just strong in body, but in heart and mind as well. They fight not only for themselves, but for others. They believe in something greater. It's humbling. The volunteer nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of what had just transpired. That's what makes humans so unique. They are not perfect, and they don't always succeed. But they never stop trying, and that is what gives them the power to change the world. The class ended with a deep silence. The alien students left the room with a newfound respect for humanity. They had come to understand that humans were not simply a species that had survived because they were physically strong or clever. They had survived because they had something else, the will to fight for something greater, the heart to show compassion, and the purpose to keep going no matter what. As the students reflected on everything they had learned, they realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their ability to conquer others, but their ability to inspire hope, to create unity, and to make the world a better place for all. They had come to admire humans not just as survivors, but as a species with a remarkable spirit, a spirit that would continue to drive them forward for generations to come. And in that moment, the alien students understood. This was what made humans truly exceptional.